Hey Nilesh, welcome to When Spirit Talks. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here because, first of all, I always thought you were such an amazing speaker and you speak from the heart. And I'm so excited to dive into our conversation today. So, if you can tell me a little bit about how you became a self-mastery coach and compassion expert, I'd love to hear your story.
Thank you, and it's a joy to be here. So, hey, everybody. Well, I'll transport you back to 2016. And back then, I didn't believe in manifestation. I wasn't spiritual. I wasn't on the journey of coaching. I was following the vanilla life, as I like to call it, the regular, well-trodden path. And there's a very beautiful thing in that. So I went to university, I studied hard, I became a doctor. And without realizing it, I had realized one of my dreams, which was to become a doctor. Anyway, I was driving, I remember, through this little village. And I used to drive there when I was training to be a GP, a family doctor. And in my head, I used to vividly imagine, like, oh, one day maybe I'll be a GP there. And lo and behold, manifestation. I ended up seeing, and my friend ended up showing me an article in a magazine. I went to go and interview at the practice, and all of a sudden, I was at 27 years old in my prescribed dream life. So I had the best job I could have found, where I 3x my income basically overnight, and also was doing what I absolutely thought I was fully focused on. I had my house, I had a wife, and we were pregnant with our first. And that stirs up a lot of questions, right? So at that time, although I didn't realize it, I started to delve deeper into, is this it, basically? What else? What else is around there? And there were many things that happened. But the most famous story, if you like, is I saw a patient. I was working really, really hard at the practice to try and reform the appointment system. It was 33 days to see a doctor back then, if for a routine appointment. And so I took it upon myself to try and be the hero, to try and remove the appointment wait time. And I became incredibly stressed and pretty much burnt out. I saw a patient, and ironically, I didn't show her any compassion. At the time, I didn't even really understand what that word compassion is, which is ironic, being that I was in a profession of care and as a doctor. And they wrote this complaint, and that made me go into this period of deep reflection and go on this journey of compassion.
Wow, what a story. And it's interesting how you mention that someone came along in your path and kind of showed you a new way of thinking, and that person really just took you on this journey to change your life and your perspective. And now you're helping so many people do that exact same thing.
Yeah, it's an honest joy, and I'm grateful every day that I was running late in that clinic and I didn't show compassion. I mean, the story is of course a bit longer, but I mean, ultimately what happened was the patient complained, said I wasn't very compassionate, but then I went into a period of 2 weeks, which I was in a deep reflection. I couldn't really talk. My inner critic was running wild. I was ruminating and overthinking. I felt like I was the worst doctor in the world. I was the only one. And yeah, I know your audience will believe in this, but around that time, I kept like receiving messages about the Dalai Lama. And I ended up buying a book called The Art of Happiness. And interestingly enough, now I know I was very attuned to this because it was a book he wrote with a psychiatrist called Dr.
Mhm.
Howard Cutler. And I read this book, and that's where I started to learn about compassion. And I thought, oh wow, this is not just the key to my problems, but other people's. And what I really like to talk about now is it's not just the key to dissolving your problems, but also activating your potential.
So, how does it actually activate potential?
So, if there was one massive structural paradigm shift I would like to share with everybody, and you may have encountered this before, but I'll challenge anyone who's listening. Are you truly embodying this? Are you stepping into your wants and your desires and your needs from a problem focused paradigm or a potential focused paradigm? And this shift is huge. And just to share with you, I go through iterations of this. Even just a few weeks ago, I was noticing, wow, I'm in a problem focused paradigm with this specific area of my life or this goal that I was trying to achieve. So let me break this down. Okay. So maybe you want to set up a spiritual business, like Stephanie's done
Mhm.
such a beautiful job, and you start pursuing it. You feel resistance. Will I get enough clients? Will I be good enough? Am I worthy? Do I want to be seen? Do I want to be heard? Am I capable enough to do this? These are all things that go through our mind, right?
Mhm.
And what you realize, maybe some of you will realize, is you're actually going after that goal to avoid the negative beliefs that you think about yourself, to avoid the real reason why you're going after it, which isn't maybe just for pure love. So, in short, how does that activate your potential? Well, you get to know the truth of who you are. And this is also why, in a lot of spiritual texts across the world, compassion is the only thing that's consistent because it is a path to enlightenment as well. And that's, of course, knowing, embodying, and expressing the truth of who you are.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now I have a question. What is your definition of self-compassion? Because I know everyone kind of thinks of it in different ways, but I'd love to know what you feel and what you resonate with that term.
Mm. So, like I said, I loved reading stuff from the Dalai Lama, and a lot of self-compassion or compassion work is rooted in Buddhism, but it isn't a religious thing. And they call it an awareness of suffering and taking action to relieve that suffering. But I believe the practice is far more broad than that and far more powerful if you really lean into what I've the benefits that I felt from it. And so I define it as the ability to embrace, enhance, or release any emotional state.
Mhm.
And if we can break that down a little bit, because if you really lean into that, you will have heard in many people, they all say the same things, right? If you're trying to live a fulfilled life, a life of freedom, achieve your goals, then the way you feel and your emotions are key. It's the most important thing, right? And so we're all trying to be happy or avoid suffering. And so this embracing of the difficult states and enhancing of the more beautiful states and savoring those, and then releasing anything that's, good and bad. This is important, right? This is the principle of equanimity as well. Can you release both the external highs of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, as well as the lows? Yeah.
Wow. So for me, when you talk about that concept, it reminds me of the cycle where when I was younger and what started me on my journey was dealing with or not dealing with the emotions. So I always kind of stuffed them in. And just like you, I was ruminating. I was focusing on like, I'm not good enough. I can't believe I made this mistake. I can't believe I treated this person this way, or I can't believe I didn't do this as well as I wanted to. And I just got stuck. And I felt like I got stuck in that hole. And it was so hard for me to give myself that compassion to manage what I was dealing with. And it just turned into this eating disorder that took me almost 10 years to kind of move past and move through. And it wasn't a quick process, but once I started with Reiki and spirituality, it gave me a way to gently like uncover and discover what was behind the emotions and allow those to come up and release them in a way that was gentle and in a way I couldn't ever do that before. So I love how you put that into words there.
That's a beautiful story. May I ask you one question?
Yeah, of course.
How do you define spirituality?
So for me, it's always interesting when I talk about spirituality because I think a lot of people think of spirituality as connected with a religion. And I grew up Catholic. And so I always kind of share that with people who are like, I can't be spiritual. I am not into spirituality because this happened to me or I don't resonate with this religion anymore. And for me, connecting with spirit in a way that is personal to you. So thinking of yourself and the world as there's something more. Like there's someone guiding us, our loved ones are still around. there's divine protection, and there's just a connection with something other than yourself. And again, it doesn't have to be a connection to an organized religion. It could just be a connection
Mm,
between you and what you feel is divine love, the creator, God, whatever that is.
I love that. That was very beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Now, you mentioned suffering, and I know so many of us deal with suffering, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, whatever it is. But how do you feel that compassion minimizes or reduces that suffering?
Mm. Well, I'm going to tell you a little story, a
Hmm.
few stories in one, because I remember when many of you all know Rangan Chatterjee, who's now, got 1 million followers and has impacted so many people. But interestingly enough, I met Rangan when he had about 30,000 followers, and he was doing some work in the space of lifestyle medicine. Anyway, I went to his course, and I remember vividly seeing this beautiful diagram which speaks about evidence-based medicine, right? And it speaks about how there's three components to it, which is first of all, the patient needs to believe in whatever treatment you're doing. Second of all, there's research, and third of all, there's clinical experience. That's it. So you need to have experienced it as a doctor. Third of all, you need to have the research behind it, and third of all, thank you, I'm going to get there, is the research studies. So where I was going to with this is that I had listened to a lot of suffering as a doctor. I had heard a lot of people have problems with their health, even their wealth. As a GP, within a few minutes, people would pour their hearts out to me, and I kind of always loved that aspect of it and listening. But this, in the last 2 years alone, I've firsthand experienced suffering. So what I'm about to share with you, know that it's come from a place of personal experience. I was quite lucky and blessed in my life to not have significant traumas growing up. I came from a loving family. But 2 years ago, my father died suddenly after 20 years of chronic illness. And not only that, I left this career of 38 years. I had 38 years of job security. And then most recently, I've gone through the most difficult and heart wounding and opening divorce. So I want you to know that, there are, and I was one of these people before I was sharing things not from a place of personal
Hmm.
experience. How does compassion minimize suffering? Well, Shinzen Young, who's a phenomenal monk, has written a book called Science of Enlightenment, and a mindfulness leader, says that suffering equals pain times resistance. So if you really understand what this equation means, it's one of the most powerful equations to ever understand. It means the only reason why we suffer is because of a resistance to the pains that we encounter in the world. And like I said, I've experienced this, and it's really, really hard when you're in it, when you've lost someone, when you're ill, when perhaps you've lost some money or something that's dear to you or something that keeps you safe. But ultimately, that's it. Self-compassion, the way it reduces suffering is because the ultimate message it gives you is that you are safe, you are protected, you are loved. These are not personal things to us. These are universal concepts that every single one of us wishes to feel. And somewhere along the way, you can call this the separation or individuation. We forget that. We forget that we're safe and protected and loved. We forget that we're worthy and capable and whole and good enough. So I really hope I inspire you guys to practice more self-compassion, no matter what it is that you're going through. And just to finish that story, with these traumas that I went through and these really difficult things, it was that my practice came into question. And when I spoke with my mentors, they said, yeah, this is natural. This is a disillusionment. So if you're in a disillusion period with your practice right now, I hear you. But what actually helped me was doubling down on those practices and feeling that resistance, feeling everything that was needed to be felt in that time. So I really hope I inspire you guys to practice some more self-compassion, because it really is the key. I'll leave you with this quote actually from Khalil Gibran. So Khalil Gibran, amazing book, The Prophet. It says in there, don't forget the same cup that you drink your wine from was the same cup that was once burnt in the potter's furnace.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that story. I can't even imagine all of the emotions and healing that you needed to go through. And it must have been really, really hard. And I love how you shared how that compassion brought you back. What was one thing you did to really give yourself that compassion? Was it something you said to yourself? Was it physical touch? Was it a specific process? Like, what actually really helped you give yourself that compassion in that moment?
Yeah, well, it was an oscillating process. It's
Hmm.
never straightforward, and your mind will trick you, tell you all kinds of stories which are just not true. But yes, you touched on a couple of really great science-backed elements to self-compassion. Touch, tone. You can develop what's called like an inner persona. So just like how you have this inner critic that's very painful and harsh, you can have an inner ally, which is loving and kind and compassionate and wise. Um, so those things all helped. If I would say one thing for me personally, it definitely was meditation for me.
Mm,
And just this is an important point. You don't have to meditate to practice self-compassion. Okay, you get to decide your practice. Ultimately, if you can, everyone can just try this right now, no matter where you are, what you're doing. If you can learn to relax your body without meditation, just relaxing your body as much as possible, and then just ask the question, what do I need in this moment? That's a very essential practice of self-compassion. And it's something I believe strongly in is that you have your own blueprint for whatever it is that you need for yourself. But for me, meditation really was really powerful. And it was, doing long sits and yeah, spending time in solitude, not
mm,
isolation, right? I had support. Uh, and that's number two thing. I received a lot of support. Actually, I realized that this was whilst I was out coaching and helping people. And I worked with a healer. I got my meditation teacher back. I worked with a coach. I had my family. I really doubled down on the support, and I took away any shame that I might
mm,
feel as somebody who has figured everything out or should be, happy all the time. And it was important for me to be vulnerable. And now I've come back, of course, um, significantly more wise and potentially more immune to such things.
mm,
But we'll see.
mm-hmm. Right, because life will keep will keep giving us those things that we need to work through. I do like the point you made about that self-critic and then also giving yourself that self-ally. I really like that
Mhm, mhm,
because I always think that yes, that self-critic is always in our mind. It's always like, you didn't do this right, or you don't look good today, or this, it's always pointing out the negatives.
mhm,
But the
mhm,
thought that you can flip that and mirror that
mhm,
into having that self ally who tells you what you need to hear, who gives you what you can't give yourself. Because I feel like sometimes what I notice is that people, for whatever reason, and I've noticed it with my clients and myself, like we tend to give things away to others and we don't give ourselves that same love back. And what really shifted for me, and you don't have to be a parent to do this, but this is actually what helped me really like put my finger on it, was I'd be going through some things and I just got like confirmation. So I feel like someone needs to hear this in this moment, but when I would go through something and I was just beating myself up about it, I literally just stopped and thought, what would I tell my daughter? If my daughter was going through this exact same thing, what would I tell her? And once I started thinking about it from that place, I was able to formulate these words and these phrases and these feelings of love and compassion that I never would have given myself because I was, again, like putting that energy externally, but really like bringing it back to myself in a way that I never could have before. So if you think about it, if you don't have a child, if you have like a pet or a loved one, like a friend, whatever it is, if you're going through a really hard time, think about what you would tell that person that you love so very much, and then turn that back towards yourself.
I love that, Stephanie. It's so beautiful. And I have two kids as well, so I know exactly what
Mm,
you mean. And I think that's the point about having an inner ally instead of
mm,
an inner enemy is huge, but a lot of people, I also believe that sometimes people can completely undervalue how powerful that is. And in my own practice, as I became more conscious of my thoughts, I realized, well, the inner critic wasn't so loud, but do I actually have like someone who's deeply loving to me in my head? And then what are the physiological implications of that? Like we know that self-criticism activates the threat system of our brain. And so in a low grade threat state, we'd see stuff like increased cortisol, but really, really interestingly, we'd see a lower heart rate variability. And this is that marker that's associated with longevity,
Mm.
creativity, and many other things. We know the power of the heart is immense. And again, we're now just uncovering a lot more science about that, about how powerful that really is. So I don't want I like the simplicity of the message that it
Mhm.
is in a friend in a ally over an enemy, which is what Kristen Neff and those of amazing teachers say. I really think that there's something, this is what I strongly believe, that there's something far more powerful um than let's say the being undervalued perhaps is just a, oh, I've got an inner friend, that's great.
Yeah.
Um yeah.
Awesome. And when you're talking about that as well, it brings me back to energetically, how you mentioned how it brings up these feelings of like fear and feeling unsafe. That's why I always focus on grounding and like being present with your root, because when we don't feel safe or secure, or we feel uneasy or fearful or at risk of danger, I feel like our whole system energetically gets shocked. And it's so hard to meet the higher levels where you're feeling that love and compassion, where you can think about things in a more like easy to understand way without the fears like thrown in. So I do love that ability to really like ground yourself in the moment and like really stabilize that those lower chakras, because I feel like energetically that's something I see all the time, where once those lower chakras, and again, this is oversimplifying, but like once those like lower chakras are balanced, it's so much easier to feel safe in your body and then start to express and give that love too.
Yeah, that's something I really noticed in you, Stephanie. That's great because I too practice energy healing, and I think it is important to be balanced, right, in both
Mhm.
lower and higher self. And it's a challenge in the world,
Mm.
but I see you do that very well. So
Yeah, I have a question because this just came to me, and I know there's so many people who are who are dealing with this in their lives. And it's about handling situations with compassion when, let's say, you're at home or at work and you're dealing with people who are not compassionate towards you. Like, what is one way to kind of think about that in a new way or handle that situation when maybe you're not shown compassion, but how to deal with that in a compassionate way, if that makes sense.
okay. So this is about dealing with maybe criticism or judgment from others,
Mm-hmm.
something I'm very well versed in.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. That's the first thing to say. And of course, the number one place to start, if we take a situation, let's take a story. I remember this. Now,
Mm-hmm.
my mum has been an enormous inspiration to me. She's probably going to listen to this. She's my number one fan.
Aw.
And but like any son and mother or any parent and child, there are challenges, right? And so we often come under judgment from our family. So let's take that example because that's the most difficult. The first thing to say is, it makes sense. And I literally would put my hands on my heart if I was experiencing judgment from someone, especially someone close to me, and just soothe myself with it makes sense. And the reason for that is often people's judgments say more about them than they do
Mm-hmm.
about us. And depersonalizing it, not taking things personally, like Don Miguel Ruiz's phenomenal book Four Agreements would say, that's a very, 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 very powerful place to start. And that's the most self-compassionate thing you can do to feel safe and feel protected. So hands on the heart and say, it makes sense. The second thing, the reason why it makes sense, and the second thing that's really interesting from a scientific point of view, is the people who we feel the most emotional connection with have the highest likelihood to hurt or harm us. And so
Mm.
that's why I take the example of my mum. And to tell you the story, I remember there was one time when I was dropping my son off to nursery, and my mum was in the car, and bless her heart, she's always trying to make me the best father, person that I could be. And she turns to me and dropped my son off. She says, "Can I give you some feedback?" And so this is self-compassion in motion. Now, typically, my pattern would have been, okay, of course, yeah, I'm unworthy, I'm insignificant, I'm not capable. So I'm going to listen to what you tell me and I'm going to like wear it because I need to be better. This is the paradigm I was sharing with you at the start, problem
Hmm.
focused. But I turned to her in that moment and I said, you know what, Mum? Thank you. But actually, no.
I love that.
And she tried to say, she's like, what do you mean? And then I said, listen, I love you. We have a great relationship in this way and this way. And let's talk about what you cooked last night for dinner because it was so delicious, and what we did here and there, where we're going to go out or what holidays. Like I don't need that from you.
Mm.
And now, of course, we are much closer, and that's one of the most priceless things about the practice of self-compassion for me and this journey is the relationships with my family. But that's an example of how, if you're facing judgment from others, that you can look inwards, soothe yourself, understand that it's natural for you to feel the way that you feel about it because there's the emotional connection. And then number three is set your boundaries, right? And it's difficult to do that, but you can say no to anything that doesn't serve you, especially if it's from a place of love, which that was, right? When I said to her, like, I love you. We like to focus on these things. I'm not interested in receiving judgment from something. And so, yeah, it is definitely a challenge dealing with criticism from others. And I suppose the other thing, the last thing I would mention on managing criticism from others and not being too affected, let's say, by people who are not compassionate, is basically understanding that everybody's living in their own world, their own realities, and the classic phrase, hurt people, and whole people heal people. And so we can't necessarily expect others to treat us in the same way as we treat them. But you always have the power to choose who gets your energy as well, and how you protect it and where you focus your attention. Um, so I could dive a little deeper, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. And I love how you shared that story because it also brought it back to the point you made earlier where you can ask yourself, like, what do you need in this moment? And yes, you were so used to like taking that feedback, but in that moment, you're like, I don't need it. I can't, for whatever reason, it's
Yeah.
not for me right now. And you were able to set that boundary. Like you took your power in a gentle way and like just said, I don't need to hear it right now or whatever it is. And so that's amazing that you were able to do that for yourself and that you are sharing that with people that yes, you can, deal with situations and deal with people's energy in a way that allows you to either set boundaries or make a statement in a kind way, whatever works. And I find too that sometimes people might not respect your boundary, but it doesn't mean you should like take them down and disregard it. Like you can continue to set that loving boundary as well.
Yeah, let's actually dive deeper in this. This is a huge one, and it's something that I've healed and continue to heal a lot.
Yeah.
But I work with people who are what I like to call nice performers, and that's because that's
Mm,
what I used to be. And so by nice, I mean that when they were young, they've grown up with this paradigm that they need to deeply care for others in order, and this is to keep it, to be fully loved. So often the reason why other people's judgments hurt, especially when they're close to us, is we are living through this paradigm as I have to be nice. I cannot receive any criticism. I have to be perfect. They can't say anything bad about me.
that was me.
Yeah. And if you look, and I looked at this deeply, right? Because I had various people at various points in my life who were taking advantage of me, as it were, and where I was pleasing. But when I looked deeper under that, I realized it was because I was really focused in to summarize it, I was really focused in the short term. Like I was trying to avoid short-term pain. the truth is it was a disservice to both parties in relationships that I was avoiding boundaries, I was avoiding conflict, I was avoiding my own emotions, and being, what would people think? What would people say if I actually spoke my truth? If I actually lived in my truth? And we know as well, like the science of this is big. People like Gabor Mate speak about this, that if you are nice, a people pleaser, you get more autoimmune conditions, you get sick, you potentially have worse health, relationships. And so, I think in spirituality, we get confused a lot between nice and kind.
Mm.
A simple analogy for this is, let's say, the nice mum is the mum who will let their kids sit on the couch and eat ice cream all day. Right? And we all know inherently that a bit of ice cream is beautiful, but all day, every day, that's just to avoid the children being upset with them. And the kind mother will set up structures, environments where that support their health and well-being, no matter, even if the kids potentially don't initially like it. So it's about adopting that kind over nice is a huge thing that I work on personally and with clients a lot.
Yeah, that's a great example. And for me, when I tie it into that energy piece, it's about like giving and receiving and have it
Mm.
being like more reciprocal because so many of us, we give because we want to be accepted, we want to be loved, we feel like that's the way we get it back. But also, it's so depleting when we do that. And just paying attention to relationships and making sure that there is some kind of reciprocity because when you're giving so much, again, energetically, you're being depleted. And if no one gives it back to you, it's just about setting time to give it back to yourself. But making sure there's that give and take, that give and receive is super, super important. And this kind of leads us into the spirit segment. And I want to know what is one thing you always include in your daily routine that keeps you spiritually grounded and balanced that might help others do the same.
Mm. Meditation for me, absolutely. Yeah. So I will aim to meditate at least once a day, but sometimes twice, depending. And yeah, it certainly helps me feel grounded. And I would recommend that, even if I'm sure many of you have your practice, but relaxing the body is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do over and over and over again. Yeah.
Thank you. And what is your favorite story regarding your connection to spirit?
Oh, wow. So how long do I have? This is a good one.
You can talk as long as you want.
Okay, this is a good one. So I suppose this is when I started to really get into intuition. I was studying the Silver method, and back then I remember all I was interested in was accomplishing goals and achieving goals, and so I thought the Silver method would be good for that. Anyway, I remember I went to bed as they often do in the Silver method. You go to bed with an intention that you receive some information in a dream. And I did. And one day I received quite a strong message in the morning to reach out and write an article on someone who I didn't really know, but I'd met him on social media. And his name was Simon Alexander Ong, who's now a Penguin author
Oh,
and has done amazing things since we met. So anyway, I reached out to him. I said I was going to write an article. And this is how I met an enlightened monk who was recognized by the Dalai Lama at 13. Okay, so this is a story. Simon, because he enjoyed the interview and the article I wrote so much, he invited me to meet him at a members club in London called the Conduit. At the time, I was planning on working with change makers, and the club was for change makers. So I thought, wow, this is very synchronicities. I go there, I meet him. I end up becoming a member there. A few months later, I'm sitting at the bar and I'm talking with my friend about compassion. And a Canadian guy next to me out of nowhere said, "Oh, you into compassion?" It turns out some Lama from Buddhist traditions was speaking at the conduit that night, and this Canadian had flown in especially to witness him. Anyway, him and I somehow became friends, and he then started following my work and was also completely besotted with compassion and spreading this message across the world. So much so, he kept asking me to go and meet this guy called Lelung Rinpoche, who lived somewhere in the UK in just some tiny little like house with a family. And he said, this guy is enlightened, and he's recognized by the Dalai Lama at 13 as being enlightened. Bear with me. Anyway, so
Mhm.
as always, it's never linear, right? I ignored the message. I went on, did my own things, carried on. About 6 months later, I end up going to Mindvalley University. And I'll shorten this story because it is quite long, but basically, I end up meeting Charlie Morley, who's a lucid dreaming teacher. And Charlie, I tell him this story, and Charlie says, "Oh, Lolong Rinpoche, I was going to go and I've been asked to go and also go and meet him." So we made a promise, and 3 months later, we went to go and meet this enlightened monk, and it was one of the most wild experiences of my life because when you meet someone who's truly enlightened, you can feel that energy just in their presence. And we spoke to him for about half an hour. I would say he probably said 10% of the words I've said so far in the whole podcast. And he laughed a lot. And he told us a story about how he came to the UK to look at Buddhist teachings, and he had these like ancient Buddhist teachings on this laptop, and he ended up meeting the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson this time, and leaving this laptop and losing all these ancient Buddhist teaching whilst he was here. And he laughed about it, which is classic Buddhist traditions, the impermanence of things. So that's one of my favorite stories. And by the way, I met about three or four other people along the way. I've shortened it for this, but that's the power of following your heart and following your intuition and yeah, listening to that inner guidance, spirit, whatever you resonate with.
Oh, I love that. That was such a cool story. That was great. Now, what is one final piece of advice you have for listeners trying to improve their spiritual well-being?
Okay. Well, I must go back to what I said at the start,
Hmm.
which is to shift from a problem focused lens or paradigm to a potential focused. I believe we all came to this planet with gifts. And no matter what you've experienced, all the traumas, all the pain, all the suffering, no matter how much you've experienced or how little, maybe you're thinking, I haven't experienced enough to go and help people and embody my gifts. That was me. Be careful what you ask for. You'll then potentially have more suffering. Just start whatever it is. And that doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't mean you have to set up a business or do anything like that. It can be lighting up someone with your presence and your kindness and your love and compassion. But please start today and do that through self-compassion, through knowing that you are a powerful creator and you're here to help and express that with the world.
Speaking of energy, the whole recording so far, your aura is like so beautiful and so bright and so thick. This entire time, that's all I've been focusing on. Um,
Thank you.
where can our listeners go to learn more about you?
So I would love to connect with anyone as that's what I really do all this for. And it's really special to hear if people resonate with things. I also learn a lot from your experiences. So you can connect on Instagram, which is just at Dr. Satguru. That's DrSatguru. And then my website is the same, drsatguru.com. I know you've had some website issues, Stephanie, me too at the moment.
Oh
So getting some of
no.
those revamped. We'll get them revamped, but I would say contact me through Instagram is the best way. And yeah, we have a whole new bunch of new content coming out. So we're always really keen to hear what you guys resonate with and what you love.
Oh, so exciting. Now, before we go, I picked a card to tell me a little bit about you, and there will be a message for everyone else at the end. But are you ready for your card?
It's 4:44 on the clock right now, so that's
No
perfect.
way. I love
Yeah.
it. You ready? Okay. Amazing. You got the Seven of Pentacles, which when I look at this card, it reminds me of, let's say our life was a garden. It's about how you potentially yourself have has planted these seeds of love and compassion and healing and growth and lessons, but how you're also helping others create that same beautiful garden, that same life by helping them plant seeds and like those thoughts that you were talking about, like shifting from the problem based to this and allowing them to just experience this beautiful life that is really has grown with compassion and love. So that's what I saw when I thought of this. And for anyone who isn't watching and is listening, it's basically soil with these beautiful seeds and a shovel that's ready to be planted.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I'm very grateful for that.
Aw, you're welcome. And the message for everyone else is to set intentions, write down your goals and your dreams, and then have patience because it might take some time to get there. But again, just continue to plant those seeds of compassion so those things come to fruition. So, Nilesh, thank you so much for being here and for talking and sharing everything that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to be on. And I look forward to connecting soon.